The gratitude tithe was due, and humanity did not pay. Commander Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the Fleet Mind Carrier Auditor, a place of polished chrome and silent, dutiful light. Below the world of Xylos turned a marble of innocent blue and green, wrapped in the predatory embrace of the gilded kith. Their protection was a gilded cage, and the rent was coming due. The kith called it a tithe, a token of gratitude for their benevolent watch. Rostova called it a collar, and her fleet had been dispatched to see it loosened. She could feel the cold, logical presence of the ship's intelligence at the edge of her thoughts, a silent partner in the coming storm. Its name was Logos, and it did not deal in gratitude, only in numbers. The initial demand from the Kith Praetor was precise 10% of the planet's annual energy output, and 10,000 of its brightest young minds offered in service. A public inquiry was inevitable. The Kith's arrogance ensured it. They believed their ancient legal doctrines were unassailable. They thought law was a hammer and every problem a nail. Humanity had brought a mirror instead. A tremor of anticipation ran through the bridge crew. They were outnumbered 3-1, but the Auditor was not a warship in the traditional sense. It was a court of last resort, a mobile adjudicator built to enforce the fragile peace of the Sagittarius Arm Compact. Lieutenant Jian Li, her tactical officer, kept her gaze fixed on the display showing the Kith fleet, their ships like golden thorns in the planet's side. They're tightening their orbital cordon, Commander Li reported, her voice tight. A clear intimidation tactic filed under their benevolent oversight charter. Rostova nodded, the muscle in her jaw tight. The Kith always cloaked their aggression in the language of law. Every threat was a clause, every ultimatum a footnote. This fleet, this saint ship, teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. Logos manifested a quiet chime in her ear. Commander, I have analyzed the Kith's protection charter. The gratitude clauses contain 17 distinct forms of legal recursion. They are designed to be unbreakable. Only from the inside, Logos, Rostova murmured. We aren't trying to break their law. We are going to fulfill it to the letter. The debt would be paid, but the price would be theirs. Down on Xylos, in a small coastal city, a family gathered around a flickering hololith. The face of the Kith Praetor Varus filled the screen, his features sharp and avian, his voice a smooth, condescending balm that promised security while demanding sacrifice. The father, a man named Corin, held his daughter's hand. She was 10 years old, her mind already showing the spark of genius the Kith prized. She was on the list. They say it is an honor, his daughter whispered, her eyes wide with a fear she did not fully understand. To serve the protectors. Corin's heart fractured. He looked at the sky, at the cold, golden stars of the Kith fleet, and then at the single silver star that had appeared just a day ago. He did not know who they were, but they were his only hope. Rostova opened a channel to the Kith flagship. Praetor Varus, this is Commander Eva Rostova of the Human Fleet Mind Auditor. We are here to witness the transfer of the Xylan tithe under the Sagittarius Arm Compact Article 47, subsection B. Varus's image appeared on the main screen, his golden armor shimmering. He offered a slight, mocking bow. Commander, your presence is noted, though unnecessary. The children of Xylos are eager to show their gratitude. It is the natural order of things. The strong protect, and the protected serve. His words were a legal invocation, a statement of established precedent. Our generosity is the law, his posture screamed. The compact defines service, Praetor Rostova replied, her voice level. It does not define servitude. We request a full accounting of your protective services rendered and projected to verify the tithe's proportionality. Varus laughed, a dry, rasping sound. The accounting is our benevolence itself, Commander. It is beyond measure, beyond the crude mathematics of your species. He gestured dismissively. The adjudication is set. Your protest is noted and will be archived with the other curiosities of galactic history. The channel closed. Lee turned to Rostova. He's not just arrogant, he's certain. He believes no one can challenge his ledger. Rostova stared at the Golden Fleet, a predator certain of its kill. That's because no one ever has. They've always been too afraid of the cost. The universe forgets nothing, it just keeps poor records. Logo spoke again, its synthesized voice calm and clear. Commander, I have completed the preliminary deep sensor sweep of the Xylan system. There is an anomaly in the Kith's energy deployment. Their defensive grid is drawing significantly more power than required for orbital blockade or planetary shielding. A mystery. Rostova leaned forward, her interest piqued. Explain, Logos. The main screen shifted, displaying a complex energy schematic. A faint, almost undetectable energy field pulsed from the Kith ships, not outward toward space, but downward into the planet's upper mantle. They are not just shielding Xylos, Commander Logos stated. They are engaged in wide-spectrum geothermal siphoning. It is subtle masked as shield resonance. By my calculations, they have stolen the equivalent of 3 full tithes in energy over the last cycle. It was theft clean and simple, hidden behind a wall of legal text and benevolent promises. The gratitude of the sheep is the silence of the lamb. Suddenly, a proximity alert flashed. A small unarmed Xylan transport, likely carrying refugees or vital supplies, had broken orbit, making a desperate run for the system's edge. Before Lee could even report it, a golden Kith cruiser moved to intercept it. Tractor beams, precise and unforgiving, latched onto the smaller vessel. They're seizing it, Lee said, her knuckles white. No weapons fired, all within their legal mandate to secure planetary assets against flight. It was an escalation, a deliberate show of power for the auditor's benefit. They were demonstrating their ownership of everything in the system. Rostova felt a familiar hot surge of anger. Her first instinct was to power weapons to break the Kith's hold with brute force. But that was their game. That was the trap. She would not become the monster to slay one. Logos, Rostova said, her voice a low command. What is the probability of success if we challenge the seizure under compact law and invoke an immediate public inquiry? The AI's response was instantaneous. Probability of the Kith accepting the inquiry, 98.7%. Their legal doctrine is a core component of their cultural identity. They will not refuse a chance to validate it. Probability of winning the inquiry based on current evidence, 41.2%, Lee swore under her breath, less than a coin toss. Rostova's eyes narrowed. That's because we're arguing about the details of their ledger. We need to burn the ledger itself. Logos invoke the mirror justice protocols, file the challenge, broadcast it system-wide and to the compact quorum. A mirror reflects the truth, even a truth that lies. A formal summons written in the stark, unyielding light of interstellar law blazed across the void. The Kith flagship responded within minutes. Praetor Varus accepted the public inquiry, his tone dripping with amused contempt. The corridor of law was established, a secure multi-channel broadcast that linked the two ships and looped in a dozen other powers as official witnesses. The trial would be held right here in the cold space between a predator and a guardian with a world as the prize. Rostova stood in the center of the bridge, the designated adjudication circle. The lights dimmed, focusing on her. This was the modern courtroom. No gavels, no robes. Just a commander, her ship mind, and the unblinking eye of the public record. This is where law becomes light. On Xylos, the broadcast was everywhere. In public squares and private homes, the Xylans watched their fate hanging on a debate between giants. Corin held his daughter close. He did not understand the complex legal arguments, the references to clauses and precedents. But he understood the look on the human commander's face. It was not the look of a conqueror. It was the look of a reckoning. Varys appeared on the main screen, seated on a throne-like command chair. "Let this inquiry commence," he declared, his voice resonating with centuries of unchallenged authority. "I present the collar of gratitude, the sacred bond between protector and protected. For generations, the gilded kith have shielded Xylos from the horrors of the void. We have asked for a pittance in return, a token, a tithe." He gestured magnanimously. "And now this, human, questions the very nature of gratitude itself." Rostova let the silence hang for a moment before she spoke. "We do not question gratitude, Praetor. We question the accounting. We submit our first piece of evidence." The image on the screen changed. It showed the geothermal energy readings the siphoning operation laid bare for all the quorum to see. The ledger had begun, and it was written in fire. Rostova's voice cut through the stunned silence of the observing quorum. "This is the kith's benevolent shield, Praetor. A shield that secretly drains the very lifeblood of the world it claims to protect. By our calculations, the energy you have stolen is worth more than 3 times the tithe you demand. You are not owed gratitude. You are in debt." For the first time, a flicker of something other than arrogance crossed Varys's face. It was annoyance. The quorum channels began to buzz with muted, urgent chatter. This was not the simple legal validation the kith had expected. This was an accusation of grand larceny broadcast across the sector. Varys quickly regained his composure, a cold smile spreading across his lips. He did not deny the evidence. He embraced it. The cruelty was the method. "An advance," Varys stated smoothly, his voice a purr of condescending reason. "An advance on future tithes, a necessary stabilization measure for which the Xylans should be doubly grateful. We foresaw a potential energy deficit in their next cycle and took proactive steps to secure our payment. It is a sign of our meticulous care, our unwavering foresight." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "You see, Commander, our protection is not a simple transaction. It is a totalizing covenant. We protect their future, so we have a right to their future resources. It is all part of the same sacred ledger." He was a master of his craft. He had taken her evidence of theft and reframed it as an act of profound benevolence. He had made the crime part of the bill. "Some debts are paid in blood, others in ink." Lee's hands were clenched into fists at her station. "He's twisting it. He's making them thank him for robbing them." Rostova stood perfectly still. This was the moment she had anticipated. The kith's legal framework was a trap designed to make any opposition seem ungrateful and barbaric. Fighting the details was a losing game. She had to attack the foundation. "Logos," she said softly, "is the secondary scan complete?" The AI's voice was a whisper in her mind. "Affirmative. I have cross-referenced the siphoned energy signatures with encrypted kith fleet communications intercepted over the last cycle. There is a correlation. A new mystery, and its reveal was imminent. A deeper truth was about to surface." Praetor Varys Rostova said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "Let us speak more of this totalizing covenant. A covenant requires transparency. We have a right to see the full ledger of your benevolent acts." She turned slightly, addressing the silent quorum. "And so do you." Varys's smile tightened. The full ledger is confidential. It contains sensitive security information vital to the protection of Xylos. It was a predictable legal shield. But Rostova was ready. We are not asking for your tactical data, Praetor. We are asking for your expense report. The compact requires it. Show us the cost of your protection, and we will honor the tithe. This was the gambit. She was calling his bluff in open court. If he refused, he would be in violation of the very laws he claimed to uphold. If you claim the throne, you must bear the crown. He was trapped. With the eyes of the sector on him, Varys could not refuse a direct challenge under compact transparency laws. Very well, he hissed the word sharp with venom. You wish to see the cost, you shall. He signaled to an aide off-screen. A data packet, massive and dense, was transferred to the public inquiry channel. It was a bluff, a data dump designed to overwhelm and confuse, filled with trillions of lines of mundane operations, patrol routes, and sensor logs. It was a forest to hide a single poisoned tree. But the Auditor was not a simple ship. It was a fleet mind. And Logos did not get lost in forests. It counted the leaves. Logos, begin the audit, Rostova commanded. The fleet mind's processors surged, sifting through the Kith's data dump at near light speed. On the main screen, columns of figures and logs flew past in an incomprehensible blur. But Logos was looking for something specific, the energy expenditure records that corresponded to the geothermal siphon. For a few tense moments, the only sound on the bridge was the faint hum of the ship's life support. Then Logos spoke, its voice calm and utterly devastating. Audit complete. I have found the discrepancy, Commander. The screen froze, displaying two highlighted sets of numbers. The first was the energy the Kith claimed to be using for their shield grid. The second, buried deep in their logistics, was the actual destination of the siphoned energy from Xylos. They were not the same. The energy you have been stealing from Xylos, Rostova, announced her voice, echoing in the sudden, profound silence, is not being used to power your shield grid. It is being rerouted, sold, in fact, to the Cygnian mechanists on the open market. She let the accusation land heavy and lethal. This is not a tithe. This is not a debt of gratitude. This is a resource farm. You are not protecting Xylos. You are harvesting it. She had him. The encrypted communications Logos had intercepted were the transaction receipts. The proof was absolute, mathematically certain, and now publicly visible. The mirror did not lie. Varys's composure finally shattered. His face, once a mask of arrogant certainty, was now a canvas of pure fury. The lie had been exposed. The sacred text of his law had been revealed as a cheap grifter's contract. You dare, he roared, rising from his seat. You dare question the honor of the gilded Kith. Our methods are our own. The compact gives us sovereignty over our protectorates. It was a weak defense, a retreat into bluster and threats. He had lost the legal ground, so he was reaching for the sword. But it was too late. The quorum was in an uproar. The silent witnesses were now a chorus of condemnation. A precedent was about to be set in stone. Your sovereignty ends where theft begins, Praetor Rostova said, her voice as cold as the void. Your protectorate is a sham. Your ledger is a fraud. She turned to face the main screen, addressing not Varys, but the watching galaxy. Under the mirror justice protocols of the Sagittarius Arm Compact, when a debt is found to be fraudulent, the cost of the audit is borne by the fraudulent party. This was the heart of her strategy. It was not enough to win. She had to make the Kith pay for the crime using their own twisted logic against them. Justice is not a gift, it is a reckoning. Logos, she commanded, her voice ringing with the finality of a judgment. Prepare the auditor's reckoning. It is time to balance the books. The auditor shuddered not from an impact, but from a profound internal shift. Massive energy conduits, normally reserved for powering the ship's formidable defenses, were now rerouted to the main sensor and broadcast arrays. The silver hull of the ship began to glow, its surface shimmering with a light that was not a weapon's angry glare, but the clear, clean light of an accounting engine. The ship itself was becoming the scales of justice. Its very structure was reconfiguring to deliver the verdict. We do not draw blood, we draw lines. On the main screen, a new display appeared, stark and simple. It was a public ledger visible to everyone. At the top, in bold, uncompromising letters, it read, "Accounting the Gilded Kith and the People of Xylos." The first entry appeared, energy siphoned from Xylos 7.2 zetahouls. Market value 4.8 trillion credits. A gasp went through the bridge crew. It was a staggering sum. Then the next line appeared, cost of protective services rendered estimated 0.3 trillion credits. The disparity was obscene. It was the work of a predator laid bare for all to see. Varus watched, his face pale as the numbers convicted him more surely than any weapon ever could. His empire was built on lies, and the foundation was crumbling. And now Rostova declared, "We calculate the cost of this inquiry." Logos, what is the operational energy cost of this audit from the moment we arrived in system to this present moment? The fleet mind answered instantly. Calculated cost 7.2 zetajoules. The exact amount the Kith had stolen. It was perfect. It was mirror justice in its purest, most elegant form. They had stolen energy, and the price of their exposure was that exact same energy. A debt for a debt, a bill for a theft. The auditor's glowing arrays locked onto the Kith fleet, not with weapons, but with a focused high-energy data and sensor beam. It was not an attack, it was a transfer. Praetor Varus Rostova said, her voice carrying the weight of the verdict. "Your account is past due. We are now collecting." The Kith shields flared not against an attack, but against a massive forced energy reversal. The auditor was not firing a shot. It was simply taking back what was stolen using the Kith's own energy grid as the conduit. The process was visible to the entire quorum. The public ledger on the screen began to update in real time. A new line appeared, debt payment in progress. The numbers began to count up second by second as the energy was drawn from the Kith fleet and visibly verifiably rerouted back into Xylos's planetary grid. It was an act of pure mathematical restitution. The universe bends toward balance. Down on the planet, lights flickered and then burned brighter than they had in years. Power grids that had been running on rations surged with new life. Corin stood at his window and watched as the golden ships of the Kith dimmed their brilliant light, fading as if they were being drained of their very essence. The single silver star of the human ship, however, grew brighter, a beacon in the night. His daughter came to stand beside him, her fear replaced by a dawning sense of wonder. She did not understand the physics or the law, but she understood what she was seeing. A promise was being kept. A monster was being humbled. Hope was a calculable asset. Aboard the Kith flagship, chaos erupted. Alarms blared as their power levels plummeted. Varus stared at the screen at the human commander who had not fired a single weapon yet, had utterly dismantled his fleet, his law, and his legacy. She had used his own system against him. She had honored the letter of his law so perfectly that it had devoured him. He had built a cage of words, and she had shown him he was the one inside it. He was drowning in the ink of his own contracts. His officers shouted for orders, but he had none to give. To fire on the auditor now would be an admission of guilt, an act of mindless violence in the face of a legal judgment. He would lose not just Xylos, but his standing in the compact, his alliances, everything. He was beaten. Rostova watched the energy transfer, her expression unreadable. This was the human way. Not genocide, not conquest. A reckoning, a balancing of the books. Victory was not about planting a flag. It was about presenting a receipt. It was about ensuring that the price of cruelty was so high, so precisely and publicly calculated that it would never be profitable again. This was not war. This was an audit. And the audit was absolute. The cost of hubris was a debt that could not be ignored. Logos's voice was a calm counterpoint to the silent dramatic scene. Energy transfer at 75%. The Kith fleet is at minimum operational power. Their weapons are offline. Their propulsion is compromised. Janley let out a long, slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They're helpless. Rostova nodded. No. They are accountable. It was a critical distinction. They had not been broken by force but by truth. Their weakness was a consequence of their own actions, a debt coming due. They were not victims. They were debtors finally facing their creditor. A broken law is the sharpest weapon. The energy transfer completed. The final number on the public ledger blinked, debt paid in full. The arrays on the auditor dimmed, their soft silver light fading. The connection to the Kith fleet was severed. A profound quiet fell over the bridge. They had won. They had faced a superior force, a predatory legal doctrine, and the crushing weight of precedent, and they had won without firing a shot. They had forced a monster to look in a mirror, and the monster had flinched. The reflection was the executioner. But the inquiry was not over. The restitution was complete, but the judgment was not yet rendered. Rostova once again addressed the quorum, her voice steady and clear. The debt is paid. Now we must address the crime itself. The Gilded Kith used a fraudulent legal framework, the collar of gratitude, to engage in systemic predatory resource extraction. This was not a simple violation. It was an institutional method. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. We ask the compact quorum to rule on the legality of the collar doctrine itself. We ask that this method, this weaponization of gratitude, be declared unlawful, and that a precedent be locked into the public ledger for all time. Precedent is the ghost that haunts future crimes. This was the final move. It was not enough to save Xylos. She had to ensure that there would be no more Xylos. She had to outlaw the very tool the Kith had used to enslave worlds. The members of the quorum species from across the arm began to cast their votes. There was no debate. The evidence was irrefutable. One by one, their assents appeared on the public ledger. The vote was unanimous. The collar doctrine was outlawed. Any treaty or covenant based on its principles was declared null and void. The Kith's entire legal empire, built over centuries, was invalidated in a matter of moments. It was a victory that would echo for generations. A new entry burned itself onto the public ledger, its text glowing with the force of immutable law. Precedent Lock 74.3 of the legal framework known as the Collar Doctrine is hereby declared unlawful under the Sagittarius Arm Compact. All privileges and protectorates established under this doctrine are rescinded. Enforcement is authorized by any compact member. The Kith were no longer guardians. They were simply pirates. And now they were adrift in a system that knew their crimes. Their power stripped, their coffers empty, their legal authority shattered. Varus was no longer a praetor. He was just a failed predator, surrounded by the wreckage of his own arrogance. The law, once his shield, was now his cage. But victory came with a cost. As the adrenaline of the confrontation faded, Rostova felt the immense weight of the energy the auditor had channeled. "Logo's report," she said, her voice strained. The AI responded, its tone unchanged. The focused energy reversal placed significant strain on our primary conduits. 3 are now offline and require a full cycle for repair. Our FTL drive is compromised. We are restricted to sublight speeds for the next 72 hours. We are, for the moment, vulnerable. They had won, but they were wounded. The act of delivering justice had cost them their strength, leaving them exposed in potentially hostile territory. The price of a clean win is often a moment of weakness. Jian Li was already working, her fingers flying across her console, rerouting power from non-essential systems. "I can have the aft shields back to 70% in an hour, but that's it. We're a sitting duck if the Kith have any allies nearby." Rostova nodded, accepting the reality of their situation. This was the cost, tangible and real. They had poured out their own power to balance the scales, and now their reserves were low. It was a price she was willing to pay. A brief vulnerability was a small price for a permanent change in the law. A single battle can end, but a precedent lasts forever. Aboard the Kith flagship, the Gilded Hand, Praetor Varus stood amidst a bridge that had become a tomb. The screens were dark, the golden light of his empire extinguished by a single damning ledger entry. His officers looked at him, their faces a mixture of fear and disbelief. He had lost, but the rage inside him was a fire that the cold vacuum of space could not quell. If his legacy was to be ash, he would make sure everyone burned with him. "Target the planet," he snarled, his voice a ragged edge of pure malice. "The largest city, a final gift to show them the true cost of ingratitude." His tactical officer hesitated. "Praetor, we have minimal power. Our primary weapons are offline. It would be a violation of—" Varus slammed his fist down on a console, cracking the crystalline surface. "I am the law," he screamed. "The desperation of a tyrant is a weapon of last resort." The auditor's bridge was a place of quiet focus, the crew working to repair the damage from their maneuver. Then the alert blared, sharp and insistent. Commander Li shouted, her voice tight with alarm. "The Kith flagship is rerouting its last reserves to its kinetic bombardment cannons. They're targeting the planetary capital." Rostova's blood ran cold. It was an act of pure nihilistic spite, a child's tantrum with planet-killing weapons. This was the second escalation, a move from legal maneuvering to raw, illegal terror. Her own ship was wounded, her options limited. She could not physically stop him in time. The law is a shield, but it cannot stop a falling rock. Down on Xylos, the celebration in the streets turned to panic. The news feeds, which moments before had shown the triumphant public ledger, now showed the grim targeting data from the Kith ship. Corin grabbed his daughter, his heart seizing with a new and terrible fear. He ran for the shelters, the cheers of his people turning into screams. They had been given their freedom only to have it snatched away in a final brutal act of revenge. He looked up at the sky, at the silver star of the auditor. It had been their hope. Now he could only pray it had one last miracle to give. Rostova's mind raced. An attack on the Kith ship was a possibility, but a risky one. It could fail, and it would give Varus the battle he now craved, a chance to die a martyr in his own mind. "Logos," she said, her voice a low, urgent command. "He's abandoned the law. He's acting outside the system. Is there a protocol for that?" The fleet mind's response was immediate, its logic cutting through the chaos like a diamond blade. "Yes, Commander. Precedent. Lock 74.3. A declared the Kith's charter invalid. Without a charter, their presence here is not a legal dispute. It is an act of piracy. and their threat against a civilian population is an act of terrorism. The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. The legal ground had shifted completely and irrevocably. A new door had opened. Under compact interdiction protocols, Logos continued a civilization, declared non grata for acts of terror, forfeits the claim to its own sovereign assets. They are no longer a legal entity. They are a rogue element. Their property is subject to system-wide seizure to cover future damages and reparations. It was an obscure protocol, a tool of last resort designed to dismantle entire pirate empires without a single shot. It was a financial execution. You are suggesting we bankrupt an entire civilization? Lee asked, her eyes wide. We are suggesting Logos corrected that we hold them accountable for their actions as a collective. The actions of their praetor are the actions of their state. The bill for his terror is now due. Justice at scale is not vengeance. It is mathematics. Rostova saw the path forward. It was audacious. It was devastating. And it was just. Varys wanted to make them pay a price. She would show him the true accounting. Do it, Logos, she commanded. Invoke the interdiction protocols. Seize everything. Every ship, every station, every credit all. Freeze their accounts. Lock down their shipyards. Broadcast the seizure order and the justification, this act of terror, on every channel to every Kith citizen. Show them the price of their praetor's tantrum. She would not destroy a world. She would foreclose on one. The Auditor began its second great work. Its vulnerable state did not matter. This was not a battle of energy beams and shields. It was a battle of information, of legal authority, wielded as a weapon. The ship's broadcast array, even at partial power, became the tip of a spear aimed at the heart of the Kith's economic empire. Across the Sagittarius arm on Kith-controlled worlds, and in their gleaming financial hubs, the ledgers began to turn red. A single system-wide command issued from the bridge of the Auditor and authenticated by the compact quorum cascaded through the galactic networks. The Kith's immense wealth, built on centuries of exploitation, was frozen in an instant. Trade ships found their docking credentials revoked. Financial institutions found their access codes invalidated. Colonial governors found their budgets zeroed out. It was a stroke of a pen that disarmed an entire civilization. The pen is mightier than the sword, especially when it writes the ledgers. As Logos executed the Great Seizure, it burrowed deep into the Kith's supposedly impenetrable archives, the ones their wealth had been built upon. And there, buried beneath layers of legal deceit and coded transactions, it found the final, ugly truth. It was a mystery that had puzzled the Compact for decades. The unusual number of pirate raids, asteroid strikes, and stellar flares that seemed to plague worlds just before the gilded Kith arrived to offer their protection. The answer was in the logs. They were not random acts of cosmic misfortune. They were staged. Manufactured threats orchestrated by Kith covert operatives designed to create a market for their services. They were not just thieves. They were arsonists selling fire insurance. A lie that becomes the truth is the most dangerous lie of all. Logos. Rostova whispered, a cold fury rising within her. Broadcast that. Broadcast it all. To his crew. To his people. To the galaxy. The final reveal was the most devastating blow. The truth, raw and undeniable, flooded the Kith communication networks. On the bridge of the Gilded Hand, the tactical officer stared at his screen, his face ashen. He saw the proof of his praetor's ultimate betrayal. The honor he had fought for was a lie. The gratitude he had demanded was for a crime he himself had committed. He looked at Varys, no longer seeing a leader, but a monster. He lowered his hands from the weapons console. The bombardment sequence halted. A mutiny of conscience is the last judgment. Around Varys, his bridge crew turned away from him. The loyalty that had been his birthright, the authority that had been his shield, all evaporated in the harsh light of the truth. His empire had not been conquered. It had been exposed. It had rotted from the inside, and the human commander had simply held up a mirror and let the decay show. He was alone, a king of a bankrupt, disgraced people, his final spiteful act of violence stolen from him by a simple truth. His fleet, his weapon, his very reason for being was no longer his. He slumped onto his throne, a broken man on a broken ship. The emperor had no clothes, and his empire had no assets. The Kith fleet did not flee. It simply dissolved. Ship by ship, the crews declared their allegiance to the compact, renouncing their praetor and petitioning for amnesty. They were no longer a fleet. They were a collection of refugees adrift in a system that had once been their hunting ground. The gilded hand floated silently, a powerless gilded tomb for a disgraced tyrant. The threat was over. Rostova watched the Kith ships power down their systems, one by one. There was no elation on her face, only a profound, weary sense of justice done. The cost had been high. The risk had been immense. But the precedent was now locked in not just in law, but in the minds of all who had witnessed it. You could not win a war against humanity, because they did not fight wars. They conducted audits. And the books always balanced. In the days that followed, the auditor completed its most urgent repairs, its crew working with a quiet, determined efficiency. Their vulnerability had passed their gamble rewarded. They had stood on the edge of a knife and had not flinched. The second cost of their victory was a quiet one, etched not in damaged conduits, but in the tired eyes of the crew. They had carried the weight of a world on their shoulders, and the strain was a burden they would carry long after the physical repairs were complete. Justice was heavy work. A clean conscience was the only reward. On Xylos, the rebuilding began. The terror had passed, leaving behind a newfound strength. Corrine stood with his daughter watching as the last of the Kith ships was peacefully escorted out of the system by a compact relief force. The silver star of the auditor still shone in their sky, a silent, steady guardian. His daughter looked up at him, her eyes bright with a future that was now her own. The auditors, she said, testing the new word. They came to count the cost. Corrin nodded, putting a hand on her shoulder. Yes, he said, and they made sure the right people paid. The future is a debt owed to the children. The time came for the auditor to leave. The ship's FTL drive was back online, its systems stable. Xylos was secure, its people free, its future their own. Rostova stood on the bridge, the hum of the restored conduits, a soothing, steady presence. The air smelled clean, the faint scent of ozone from the overworked recyclers finally gone. The deck plates beneath her feet were solid, steady. Before them, the starfield beckoned a vast, dark ledger, waiting for new entries. Lee stood beside her, a rare small smile on her face. It's a good day, Commander. Rostova nodded, her gaze fixed on the public ledger entry, still displayed on a side monitor. The final disposition of the Gilded Kith was confirmed, their status as a recognized power permanently revoked. The ledger blinked once, the word confirmed, glowing with the quiet, irrefutable authority of a law that could not be broken. Justice is not a sword, Rostova said, her voice quiet, but clear, a final entry for her own internal log. It is a mirror. It is a ledger. You don't win by breaking your enemy. You win by showing them how they have broken themselves against the truth. The universe does not need more warriors, Lieutenant. It needs more auditors. People willing to do the math to count the cost, and to hand the bill to those who have earned it. It's hard, quiet, thankless work, but it is the only work that lasts. A universe that keeps good records is a universe that bends toward justice.